She arrived before dawn and ran the obstacle course 300 times in secret. The base had already decided she didn't belong. They sabotaged her gear. On day 9, with everyone watching, a veteran Marine shoved her face first into the mud. She hit the ground hard. 2 seconds of silence. She pushed herself up, stood tall, and turned to face him without anger. She didn't report him. She requested a recorded CQB demonstration with him as her opponent. She had studied 40 hours of his footage. When the warehouse sealed and 43 operators stopped breathing, she waited for him to commit, then turned his own force against him. 11 seconds later, he was on the floor, staring at his hands. She looked down and gave him the one thing he never expected, a chance to stay and prove he could meet the standard. By graduation, the program they tried to destroy had become the new national model for every elite force in the country. She arrived before the sun did, 4:28 in the morning, Camp Harlow, Virginia. The parking lot empty except for 2 security vehicles in the particular darkness that exists between 4 and 5 a.m. The kind that isn't night anymore, but refuses to admit it's almost day. Commander Lena Hargrove parked her vehicle, pulled her bag from the back, walked across the gravel without hurrying. Not because she was calm, because she had already decided what this was going to cost her, and she had decided to pay it without making a production of the payment. The base was still breathing in its sleep. Distant generator hum. The smell of wet grass and diesel and cold air that had been sitting in the same place all night. She had driven 4 hours from Richmond to get here, had left at midnight, had not slept before leaving, because sleep the night before something like this was not the point. The point was to arrive first. She always arrived first. Her office was in the northeast corner of the main operations building. Smallest space in the wing. Someone had made a decision about that, about which corner, which size, which view, and the decision had been made before she walked through the front gate. The desk faced a wall instead of a window. Supply requisition she'd filed 2 weeks ago still marked pending. A chair that was slightly too low for the desk it sat in front of. She noted all of it. Set her bag down, did not rearrange anything. Got out her yellow legal pad, sat down at the desk that faced a wall, wrote one line at the top of the first page. Day 1. What do they want? A reaction. What I'll give them? Nothing. She capped the pen, put on her uniform, and sat for a moment in the quiet of a base that didn't know yet what it had just received. 12 years in the United States Navy. That was what people saw when they read her file. 3 combat deployments, 2 classified operations that still didn't have public names, a chest of commendations that officers twice her age hadn't accumulated. What the file didn't say, what files never say, was the specificity of how she had prepared for this particular assignment. 6 weeks before her first day at Camp Harlow, she had submitted a routine administrative request for the program's obstacle course layout, the kind of request that gets processed without a second glance because it looks exactly like what it says it is. A program review document, standard practice. Except it wasn't standard practice. She had taken that layout to a private facility outside Richmond, had built her own version of every station, had run the simulation in the dark before anyone else was awake 300 times over 6 weeks. Not because she was afraid of failings, because she had spent 12 years learning that the people who get to be calm in the room are always the people who did the work before the room existed. She already knew what was waiting for her here. Not the names, not the faces, not the specific shape of the resistance, but the structure of it. She had walked into enough rooms to understand that a joint program commanding role handed to a 28-year-old Navy commander by a female admiral in a Marine-heavy environment that had been running its own way for nearly a decade was not going to be welcomed with a reception committee and good coffee. It was going to be a test. The question was what kind. She intended to find out before it found her. At 0430, the first light started coming on across the base, footsteps on gravel outside. The sound of a new day organizing itself into formation. Lena stood, straightened her uniform in the dark reflection of the window that faced a wall, and walked out to meet 47 people who had already made a decision about her. The room held its breath when she walked in, not the silence of respect, something more calculated than that. The silence of people who have been talking about you and have just watched you enter and are now running the comparison between the version they built in their heads and the one that has just appeared in 3 dimensions at the front of their room. 47 of them, 32 Marines, 12 SEALs, 3 administrative officers from the Joint Oversight Committee. The particular arrangement of bodies that happens when a group has already decided where its center of gravity is. And the center, in this room, was not the podium. It was the third row. Master Gunnery Sergeant Colt Vreeland sat with his arms crossed over his chest, and his weight settled into the chair, the way a man settles into a position he has occupied for a long time. 54 years old, 31 years Marine. The kind of presence that doesn't require effort because it has been built slowly over decades into something that is simply there, the way a stone wall is simply there, regardless of whether anyone is looking at it. He had buried 2 of his people, Sergeant Marcus Feld, 26 years old, eulogy written by Vreeland himself, 3 drafts over 2 sleepless nights because none of them said the right thing, and some things don't have a right version, and you write them anyway. Corporal James Okafor, 23, lag folded in Vreeland's hands, while Okafor's daughters watched from the front row, the older one already understanding, and the younger one just following her sister's stillness. Those weren't memories that lived in the past. They were the architecture of his present, the calcified foundation of a man who had decided, somewhere between the second funeral and the third decade, exactly what military leadership meant, who had earned it, what it looked like, what it did not look like. The night before Lena arrived, he had told his senior NCOs in the mess hall after the officers were gone, "She's a political appointment. Washington wants their photograph, their checkbox. Fine, but the moment she compromises a standard, the moment she adjusts an evaluation to protect herself, the moment she trades rigor for optics, I will not be quiet about it." Nobody at that table disagreed, which was the part that mattered. Not that Vreeland had opinions. He always had opinions. But that not one person in that room had pushed back, had said, "Wait, let's see," had said, "We don't actually know yet." They had decided before she walked through the gate, before she opened her mouth, before she did a single thing that could be evaluated by any honest measure. They had decided, and 3 of the senior NCOs at that table, without being organized, without being asked, had met separately the week before Lena's first day. Just showed up in the same place at the same time, and talked about what they were going to do when the standards started slipping, which they had already decided was going to happen. Lena knew none of this specifically, but she knew the structure of it, because she had walked into rooms like this before, and the specific quality of breath-holding that filled this room when she entered. Not hostile exactly, not overtly disrespectful, just loaded with something that had been decided in advance, was a texture she recognized. She walked to the front, set her folder on the podium, looked out at the group for 5 full seconds, let them look, let them measure, let them decide what they thought they were seeing. Then she spoke. "My name is Commander Lena Hargrove. Some of you have read my file. Some of you have already made a decision about who I am based on something that has nothing to do with my file. Both of those things are fine." She held the room without raising her voice. "I'm not here to change your opinion. I'm here to run this program." A pause that was exactly long enough. This program has one standard, not a Navy standard, not a Marine standard, one standard. The best elements of both combined, applied equally to every person in this room. You will be evaluated on performance, not branch loyalty, not rank history, not relationships with anyone in this building. She looked across the room, not avoiding any section of it, not lingering on any face. "Questions before we begin?" Silence, then Vreeland, arms still crossed, voice carrying easily without effort, the voice of a man who has never once had to raise it to be heard. "Yeah, I've got one." Lena looked at him. "Sergeant Vreeland." He didn't react to being named. If anything, it settled something for him. "Have you ever led personnel in live combat? Not simulations, not training scenarios. Actual hostile fire situations where your decisions determined whether your people came home." The room tightened. A few of the younger Marines shifted in their seats. Petty Officer First Class Reef Calloway, seated toward the back with the particular stillness of someone who processes everything and performs nothing, watched Lena's face with focused attention. She held Vreeland's gaze for 3 seconds. "3 deployments," she said. 2 classified, 1 you can look up, which I assume you already have," tilted her head slightly. "Follow-up question, or can we begin?" Vreeland's jaw moved, organizing something. "I think the people in this room deserve to know the credentials of the person giving them orders." "They have my file," Lena said. "More information is available through a formal request to Admiral Merritt's office." She looked back at the room. "Anything else?" Silence, Good. Here's what week one looks like. Later, Calloway would describe that exchange to no one in particular. Just turn it over in his head during the evening session, while everyone else was debriefing the day's performance. She hadn't defended herself, hadn't performed confidence, hadn't done any of the things people do when they're trying to establish dominance in a room that doesn't want to give it to them. She had just answered the question with the available facts and then moved on. Like, the question was the least interesting thing that had happened in the last 30 seconds, which, Calloway thought, was either going to be her greatest asset in this environment, or the thing that made Vreeland decide to escalate, probably both. Day 2, 0500. The obstacle course, Camp Harlow's course, was not designed to be completed. It was designed to be survived. 2 miles, 8 feet of elevation change throughout, 12 technical stations, rope climbs under time constraint, wall breaches, cargo net crossings, mud crawls under low wire, weighted bag carries, water obstacles that were cold enough in October to make your hands stop working if you let them. Final 400-meter sprint in full combat load at the end when your body had already used up most of what it had. Target time, 22 minutes. Elite performance, sub-18. Lena ran it first, 16 minutes and 44 seconds. She crossed the finish line without visible celebration, without looking around to see who was watching, and walked directly to the water station. Drank, checked her watch, made a note on the small card she kept in her left breast pocket. The operators had been watching, and all of them had been watching, in the careful sideways way of people who are pretending not to, exchanged the specific kind of look that doesn't require words. The look that means, that was not what I was expecting. She ran it again in the afternoon. 16 minutes and 51 seconds. 20 additional pounds, Corporal Des Fontaine. 24 years old, had finished his own morning run at 19 minutes and 14 seconds, which was a strong time that he'd been quietly proud of until approximately 45 minutes ago. He watched Lena cross the second finish line and turned to the man beside him. She didn't stop once, he said, quietly. Not for anyone else. Lance Corporal Torres shook his head. Nobody told me about this. Nobody had. Because nobody knew. Because the preparation that produced those numbers had happened 6 weeks ago in a private facility outside Richmond, alone before dawn. 300 repetitions of a course that didn't officially exist yet. She hadn't just prepared for the physical demands of this program. She had obtained the specific parameters of this specific course and built her own version of it and run it until she knew every second of every station in her body and not just in her head. The difference between knowing something and having it in your body is the difference between a map and the road. She had the road. Day 4 arrived cold and quiet and with a very specific problem waiting in the equipment bay. Lena found it at 0500, 90 minutes before the first joint exercise. She was running her pre-exercise check, the same check she ran every morning, the same sequence, in the same order, and she found it, her harness. Adjustment settings loosened, not obviously, not enough to be visible at a glance. The kind of loosening that only becomes relevant mid-load, when your body is already committed to a position, and the equipment that was supposed to hold it is doing something slightly different than you believe it's doing. Her hydration pack, emptied, her radio, fault-coded into the secondary channel, set to produce static at precisely the window of the joint communication exercise. Whoever had done it had known the day's schedule, had known which channel, had known the timing. Lena stood in the equipment bay, looked at all three, then fixed them, methodically, thoroughly. The harness first, then the pack, then the radio. 45 minutes total, and while she worked with one hand, she opened her yellow legal pad to a fresh page and documented every item, date, time discovered, exact nature of the alteration, operational impact if not discovered, probable window of access based on security rotation, brick by brick, entry by entry. Not because she was building a case for revenge, because she had learned, across 12 years and 3 deployments and 2 classified operations that still didn't have public names, that the truth only wins when it is undeniable. And undeniable means documented, dated, specific. Signed at the morning briefing, Vreeland stood and raised what he described as an equipment accountability concern, suggested the commander's gear had been improperly prepped by her own support staff, raised questions in front of the full group in the specific tone of a man who is asking a question he already knows the answer to, about her operational readiness protocols. Several heads turned to Lena. She looked at Vreeland without heat, Thank you for raising that. Equipment integrity is critical. I'll include it in the weekly compliance report. She turned back to the training schedule. Now, today's joint fire exercise. Vreeland sat down. His eyes were still working, still running calculations. He had expected a reaction. Had on some level, needed one, because the reaction would have been the evidence, the flash of anger, the defensive explanation, the emotional tell that confirmed what he had already decided about who she was under pressure. Instead, she had absorbed it the way water absorbs a stone. And somewhere in the specific chill of that absorption, for the first time, something behind Vreeland's certainty shifted. Not broke, not cracked, just moved slightly, like a foundation settling under weight it hadn't accounted for. Gunnery Sergeant Hector Pruitt, seated to Vreeland's left, noticed. He noticed it the way you notice things in people you've served beside for 11 years. Not because you're looking for it, but because you know the face so well that any deviation from its normal pattern registers without your permission. He filed it away without comment. Went back to his notes, but he thought about it later. Private First Class Dara Winslow was trying to disappear. She had been trying since day one. Not because she lacked confidence in her abilities. Her abilities were documented, specific, and not a source of uncertainty for her. Top 3 in marksmanship in her training cohort. Top 5 on the obstacle course overall. The kind of operator who had arrived at Camp Harlow with a file that should have made her one of the most visible people in the program. Instead, she made herself small. Because she understood in the precise and unglamorous way that you understand things when you have experienced them enough times, that she was being watched differently, that the same error that would be logged and forgotten for someone else would be cited for her, that the same correction that would be credited as adaptability in one operator would be read as instability in another, that the coefficient applied to her performance was not the same coefficient applied to the men around her, and that coefficient was not written anywhere, was not official, was not something anyone would defend if you asked them directly. But it was there. She had run harder, spoken less, kept her posture neutral and her expressions contained, and her responses exactly one beat more measured than they needed to be. And she was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the physical demands of the course. The physical demands were manageable. She had trained for those. The other exhaustion, the constant low-grade performance of being watched differently and having to account for it at every moment without ever being able to say so out loud, that one didn't have a training protocol. Day 6, live fire sequence. Dara made a targeting adjustment error under time pressure. The kind of error that any operator makes in week 1 under time constraint. In an unfamiliar configuration, she corrected immediately. Completed the drill without further incident. Sequence did exactly what it was supposed to do when someone corrects and continues. Afternoon debrief. Vreeland brought it up, not briefly, not neutrally. That's the kind of hesitation, he said, looking directly at Dara. That gets people killed. And it's exactly why some people should not be here. Dara's face went still. She did not look away from him. She also did not respond, because she had run this equation before in other rooms with other people who held similar certainties, and she knew with the precision of long experience that there was no response available to her that did not confirm something he had already decided. Agreement would be submission. Pushback would be insubordination. Explanation would be defensiveness. There was no door in the wall he had just built, so she sat with her hands flat on her knees and her back straight and said nothing. Lena had been listening from the back of the room. She let 2 full seconds pass, then spoke, still from the back, without walking forward, because she didn't need the room to see her move toward the conflict to understand that she was handling it. Corporal Fontaine made a targeting adjustment error on day 3, she said. Her voice was flat, not aggressive, the flatness of someone reading established facts into the record. Lance Corporal Torres had a communication protocol failure on day 5, both corrected and continued. Neither was mentioned in debrief. She paused. Private Winslow corrected within the drill window and completed the sequence. That is the standard. She met it. The room was very quiet. Vreeland's jaw moved. He was organizing a response. Lena didn't give him a window to place it, moving on. Day 7 schedule. She opened her folder. The moment passed, but Pruitt, watching from the 3rd row, had noticed something. 3 of the younger Marines, the ones who have been orienting their reactions to Vreeland since day 1, looking to him the way younger operators look to the person they've decided is the authority in the room, had not looked at Vreeland after that exchange. They had looked at their notes. That was new. That was small. And that was the kind of small thing that, in Pruitt's 11 years of experience, was never actually small. That night, Dara found Lena in the equipment maintenance bay, technically closed after 2100. Dara stood in the doorway for a moment, not sure if she was intruding. Lena looked up from the harness she was inspecting. You need something, Private? No, ma'am. A pause, actually. Yes, another pause shorter. I wanted to say thank you. For this afternoon, Lena set the harness down. Don't thank me for holding the standard, Winslow. That's not a favor. That's my job. Yes, ma'am. Dara nodded. But the way you said it, yes, Lena said simply, I did, because the framing was incorrect. Incorrect framing in an evaluation context has consequences. I corrected the record. That's all. Dara looked at her for a moment. The look of someone measuring the distance between what they expected and what they got. Can I ask you something? You already are. A small breath. Almost a smile. Do you ever get tired of it? Of having to be twice as prepared just to be taken halfway as seriously? Lena looked at her for a long moment. The moment of someone deciding how honest to be. Then deciding, yes, she said. Every single day, she picked up the harness. Now go sleep. You have a 0430 start, Dara left. Lena continued working in silence. Did not open the legal pad, did not write anything down. Some things didn't need to be recorded. Some things you just carried. And the carrying was its own kind of keeping. Day 9. The hand-to-hand combatives demonstration had been scheduled for 1300. The purpose on paper was to show how Navy and Marine close-quarters techniques could be integrated under a unified operational framework to demonstrate, in front of both branches, that the best elements of each complemented rather than competed with each other. Lena had prepared for the slash in the way she prepared for everything. Thoroughly, without gaps. What she had not prepared for, what no amount of preparation accounts for, was the full weight of a 230-pound man hitting her from behind, with both hands flat between her shoulder blades. Full force, no warning, no sound before it. She was mid-explanation, facing the group, gesturing toward the floor markers, and then she was not standing. The impact drove her forward and down, and she went face first into the mud at the center of the demonstration floor, and the room, all 47 people in it, went into the specific silence of a collective sharp intake of breath that nobody released. Lena lay still, 1 second too. Then she pushed herself up, hands first, then knees, then feet. She did not wipe the mud from her face immediately. She stood first, found her foot steadied, and only then slowly reached up and cleared her eyes. She turned around. Vreeland was 5 feet behind her, arms at his sides, face arranged in an expression that was performing innocence so completely it had become its own kind of confession. Slipped, he said. The word landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water, rings spreading outward with nothing to stop them. Sorry about that, Commander. Nobody laughed. Nobody moved. Nobody made a sound. Lena looked at him. Her expression held nothing that he could use. No anger for him to characterize as emotional instability. No humiliation for him to read as defeat. No visible tremor of anything. Just eyes that were very clear and very still and looking directly at him without any of the things he had been counting on finding there. And then she nodded once. Small. The nod of someone who has just had something confirmed that they already suspected. Not a performance of composure. The actual thing. Resume positions, she said. Her voice was level. We're continuing the demonstration. She turned back to the floor markers and kept teaching. Vreeland stood there for a moment too long, watching her back. And in that specific moment, in the 4 seconds he stood there with 47 people, watching him not know what to do. Something shifted behind his certainty. Not broke. Something more quiet than breaking. The first cold recognition that the situation had a different shape than he had assigned to it. That the person standing in front of him was not responding to his architecture. Was not inside his framework at all. Pruitt saw it from the 3rd row. Recognized it the way you recognize a change in weather before the weather changes. Said nothing. Filed it that evening. Lena's office. Lights low. Door closed. She opened the yellow legal pad, wrote 3 lines. Day 9, 13:47 hours. Deliberate physical assault. Full witnesses. Cameras active. Confirmed 3 angles. She underlined the last part twice, slowly. The way you underline something when you want the future version of yourself to know that you understood its importance at the time. She set the pen down, picked up her phone, made 1 call, not to report the incident, not to file a complaint, not to do any of the things that the situation would have entitled her to do, that anyone watching would have understood and supported. She called Lieutenant Call Aubrey Strand, the Joint Legal Observer, and asked one question: if I submitted a formal request for a controlled CQB demonstration under full observer protocol with a named opponent, what was the approval process and timeline? Strand was quiet for a moment, the quiet of a man who is parsing the specific words of a question that sounds like one thing and is very clearly another. 48 hours for approval, assuming commanding officer sign-off. Video documentation would be automatic under Joint Observer Protocol. Standard procedure. Thank you, Lena said. I'll have the request on your desk by 6 so. She hung up, opened her laptop and began to write. Not a complaint, not a report. Training request. The most precisely worded training request Camp Harlow had ever received. Every clause accounted for, every regulatory citation exact, every possible objection neutralized before anyone thought to raise it. It named Vreeland specifically as the demonstration opponent. It cited joint training protocol and 3 separate regulatory frameworks. It was not aggressive, it was not accusatory, it was surgical. Because she understood something in the moment she'd stood up from that mud and turned around and looked at Colt Vreeland. Something that all the bias and sabotage and deliberate physical humiliation of 9 days had failed to teach him. She wasn't the one being tested here. She had never been the one being tested, he was. And he had just failed in the specific and irreversible way that people fail when they mistake force for power, when they confuse the ability to knock someone down with the ability to keep them there, when they push someone from behind and don't ask, not once, not before, not in 31 years of certainty, the single most important question. What if the person I'm dismissing has already prepared for exactly this? She had been watching him for 9 days, his timing, his angles, the way his left shoulder dropped a fraction of a second before his weight committed. The micro tells that 31 years of the same training had built into him so deeply they had become invisible to him. Instinct, reflex, the thing you don't know you're doing until someone shows you the footage. She had 40 hours of that footage. She had studied him the way you study a language you intend to speak fluently. Not just the words, the grammar, the logic underneath the pattern. The trap was already set. The request would be on Strand's desk at 0558, 2 minutes early, because some things you don't leave to chance. And she had never, not once in 12 years, left the things that mattered to chance. The training request landed on Lieutenant Call Aubrey Strand's desk at 0558. 2 minutes early, Strand read it once, set it down, picked up his coffee, took a slow sip, set the cup down, read it again. Then a third time, which was something he had not done with a document in 22 years of military legal observation. Because documents that required 3 readings were rare. Documents that required 3 readings and still revealed new precision on the third pass were rarer still. Every word had been chosen. Every clause had been built to anticipate and neutralize the objection that would naturally follow it. The request named Vreeland specifically as the demonstration opponent. It cited joint training protocol, standard CQB guidelines, and 3 separate regulatory frameworks that authorized the exercise under full video documentation. It specified camera placement. It specified observer positioning. It specified the exact language of the consent protocol that both participants would sign. It was not aggressive. It was not accusatory. It contained no emotional register at all. It was the most surgical document Strand had ever processed, and he had processed a great many documents. He stared at the wall for a long moment after the 3rd reading, then picked up his phone. Commander Hargrove. Good morning, Colonel. I've read your request. Yes, sir. A pause. The pause of a man deciding how directly to ask the thing he actually wants to know. I'm going to ask you one question and I want a straight answer. Always. Is this a training exercise? Lena's voice did not waver, did not shift, did not do anything that could be read as performance. It is a formal, documented, observer-certified joint CQB demonstration, consistent with the program objectives and the integration curriculum. Every element of it is by the book. A longer pause. Strand looked at the document in his hand, then at the wall, then back at the document. Approved, he said. 48 hours. Thank you, Colonel. She hung up. Strand sat with the phone in his hand for a moment after the line went dead, then set it down. Looked at the request one more time, at the camera placement specifications, at the observer positioning, at the consent protocol language. He had been in this role for 22 years. He had processed requests from commanders who were angry, commanders who were afraid, commanders who were protecting themselves, and commanders who were protecting their people, and commanders who were doing both at the same time, and calling it one thing or the other, depending on who was watching. He had never processed a request from a commander who was this calm, which meant, in his experience, one of two things. Either she didn't understand what she was walking into, or she understood it better than anyone else in the building. He filed the approval, sent the notification to Vreeland's adjutant, and made a note in his own logbook that he did not share with anyone. Request constructed to foreclose objection rather than invite it. Commander appears to have studied the relevant regulatory frameworks in advance. Approval is correct. Watch this carefully. Across the base, in the motor pool, Vreeland received the notification at 0700. His adjutant handed him the single sheet without comment, which was smart. Because Vreeland's face when he read it was not the face of a man who had been surprised. It was the face of a man who had been handed exactly what he'd decided he wanted. He read it once, folded it, placed it in his breast pocket with the specific deliberateness of someone who is keeping something close because it matters. Said nothing, and Hector Pruitt, standing 6 feet away with two of the other senior NCOs, watched that happen and felt something cold move through his chest. Not because Vreeland looked angry, because he looked certain. And Pruitt had served beside this man for 11 years, had watched him certain before many times, in many contexts. Certainty was not new, but this certainty had a different texture. The texture of a man who has decided something is going to end a specific way and has organized his entire self around that ending. That was the part that worried Pruitt, not the confidence, the narrowing. The other NCOs moved off. Pruitt stayed. "You going to be ready?" he said. Not the question he actually wanted to ask, but the question the situation allowed. Vreeland looked at him. "For what?" "For whatever she's prepared to beat." Then, "I've handled operators twice her size." "I know," Pruitt said. He didn't say the rest. Didn't say, "That's not what I'm asking." Didn't say, "I watched 40 hours of footage get through a routine administrative channel last week, and I think you should ask yourself why she needed that footage and what she was looking for in it." Didn't say any of the things that were true and that Vreeland, in his current state of certainty, was not positioned to hear. He just nodded and moved on, and thought about it for the rest of the morning. Petty Officer First Class Reef Calloway had been awake since 04:01, which was not unusual. What was unusual was that instead of running his standard pre-dawn routine, he had been sitting on the edge of his bunk in the dark, thinking, 12 years in. He had served under 5 commanders. 3 of them he would follow anywhere without needing a reason. The other 2 had been competent enough that the distinction hadn't mattered much in practice. He had learned, over those 12 years, to read situations the way you read weather, not by looking at the sky, but by watching how people moved under it. He had been watching Lena Hargrove for 9 days, and what he kept returning to was this: she never did anything for show, not once. Not a single gesture, not a single word, not one moment in 9 days that he could identify as performance. Everything she did was structural, load-bearing. The way every word in that training request had been load-bearing, which he had heard about through the network that moves information through a military base faster than official channels ever will. She wasn't reacting to the situation. She was building inside it. He found her at 0700 in the equipment staging area, running through her kit with the automatic competence of someone whose hands know the sequence without needing instruction from the brain. He stood nearby for a moment before speaking, not because he was uncertain, because he wanted to say it right. "Commander Calloway, I've been around a while," he said. 12 years. 5 commanders, a pause. "You're working at a level I don't see often." Lena kept moving through her kit. "Thank you. I want you to know," he said, "that whatever happens in that demonstration, there are people in this program who've been paying attention. Not to the noise, to the performance." She looked at him then. Direct, unhurried. "What happens in that demonstration is a training exercise. That's all it is." Calloway held her gaze. "Yes, ma'am." He walked away, but he was smiling, just slightly, with his back to her, because that answer, that specific, careful, precisely worded answer, told him everything he needed to know. She was already thinking about the footage, about the record, about what the documentation would show and what it would not show, about how to do what she was going to do and have it be, by every available measure, exactly what she had said it was. A training exercise, that was all. A day 10 arrived with low cloud cover and the particular gray quality of light that makes everything feel slightly unreal. The operators filed into morning briefing and the room had a different weight than it had carried on day 1. Word had moved through Camp Harlow. The way word always moves through a military installation, fast, slightly distorted at the edges, and landing differently in different people depending on what they had already decided to believe. The operators who had been taking their cues from Vreeland had one version. She's using paperwork to protect herself because she knows she can't perform on an even field. The demonstration is a controlled environment she designed specifically so she can't lose. The documentation is armor, not evidence. The SEALs and the operators who had been watching Lena's numbers had a different version. They said it quietly, in the specific understated language of people who are acknowledging something they haven't fully processed yet. She's not running from it. She's walking toward it with a camera. Both camps watched the morning proceed and waited. Then, on day 11, Vreeland made his most sophisticated move. And he didn't make it directly. Word began circulating through the base, not through any official channel, not through anything that could be traced or sourced or confronted, that Commander Hargrove's selection for the program had involved political intervention at the Pentagon level, that Admiral Merritt had been pressured by diversity initiative requirements, that Lena's file, impressive as it appeared on the surface, contained evaluations that had been adjusted upward by commanders who didn't want the career trouble of giving an honest assessment, a whisper campaign, deniable, untraceable, precisely calibrated to the one thing that official performance data could not immediately counter. The suggestion that the performance data itself was suspect. By day 12's morning formation, Lena could feel it, not in anything anyone said, in the calibration of the room. The half-second longer it took for responses to come when she gave direction. The microscopic recalibration in how some of the younger operators held themselves near her. Not disrespectful, not overt, just slightly more held back than they had been. The specific texture of a group that has been given a reason to reassess and is quietly doing so. She had anticipated this. She hadn't anticipated how much it would cost her to stand inside it, because she was 28 years old. And she had been preparing for this specific program for 6 weeks, and for situations like this one for 12 years. And she was good at this, genuinely, demonstrably, documentably good at this. And she was standing in a room where people were being quietly encouraged to believe that her goodness at this was not real, was manufactured, was a product of systems that had adjusted the standard downward to accommodate her, rather than a product of the work she had actually done. And there was nothing in that moment that she could say that would fix it, because the nature of a whisper campaign is that the response to it becomes evidence for it. Defend yourself and you're defensive. Perform confidence and you're performing. Ignore it and you're oblivious. There is no clean move. There is only the long, slow, grinding work of continuing to be exactly what you are, until the accumulation of evidence makes the whisper impossible to sustain, which she knew, which didn't make it easier to stand there day 12. Oro 445. Before anyone else arrived, she went to the obstacle course alone, ran it, then ran it again, then a third time. Not because it would change anything about how the room saw her. Not because she was working through a strategy. She ran because physical exertion was the one language her body fully understood when her mind had gotten too loud, when the pressure became so specific and so sustained that thought itself became a liability rather than a tool. After the third run, she bent forward with her hands on her knees, breathing hard, and stayed there for a long moment, not thinking, just breathing. Just the sound of her own breath and the gray Virginia morning and the empty course and the specific particular quiet of a place where no one was watching. Then she straightened up, looked at the empty course in front of her, the mud, the rope stations disappearing into the mist at the far end. Everything still, everything waiting, and set into the dark, to no one, in the voice of someone who is not performing anything for anyone, not even herself. You don't get to decide what I am, once. Flat, without drama. The way you say something when you mean it more than you have words for and you're alone, so you don't need the words to be anything except true. Then she walked back toward the operations building. She had work to do. Day 12 afternoon. Lena requested a private meeting. Pruitt arrived at her office, not knowing exactly what to expect. He sat across from her in the small room, desk facing a wall. Supply requisition still pending on the corner. Yellow legal pad closed in front of her, and waited. He had been around long enough to know that you learn more from how a person arranges a meeting than from what they say in it. She had asked for him specifically. Not the group of NCOs, not Vreeland, him. You've been with Sergeant Vreeland for 11 years, she said. Not a question, not small talk. Just the first fact of what was going to be a short conversation. Yes, ma'am. I'm not going to ask you to evaluate him. I'm not going to put you in a position that compromises your relationship with your team. She looked at him directly. No warmth in it, but no coldness either. Just attention. The specific quality of attention that means the person giving it is actually listening. I have one question. You can answer it or not. Pruitt nodded. In 11 years, Lena said. Has he ever been wrong about a person and acknowledged it? Pruitt was quiet. Not briefly quiet. Not the quiet of someone searching for the right phrasing. The quiet of someone who is deciding how honest to be and taking that decision seriously. The room held it. Lena didn't move to fill it. Once, Pruitt said finally. 2019. Young Lance Corporal came in with a particular attitude, the kind Vreeland reads as inability to be corrected. He dismissed him in the first week. Said the kid wouldn't make it past month 2. He paused. The kid went on to distinguish himself in theater. Commendation from his commanding officer. The real kind, not the paperwork kind. What did Vreeland do with that? He never said anything to the kid. Pruitt looked at the wall briefly, then back at her. But he said it to me. Maybe 6 months after, when we heard the news. He said, Pruitt, I called that one wrong. He paused. That was it, just that. But he said it. Lena nodded once. Thank you, she said. That's all. Pruitt stood. He was at the door before he stopped. He hadn't planned to say anything else. But something about the meeting, its brevity, its precision, the fact that she had asked exactly one question and it had been that question, made him turn back, Commander. Why did you want to know that? Lena looked at her legal pad. Not at him, at the pad, as if the answer was somewhere in the closed pages of it, something she'd already written down and was checking against. Because it tells me something about what's possible, she said quietly. Pruitt left. She opened the legal pad to a fresh page. Wrote one word. Paul capped the pen, closed the pad, sat with it for a moment. Then she opened her laptop and pulled up 4 years of Vreeland's training footage that she had requested 3 days ago through a standard program review protocol, a routine administrative request, the kind that gets processed without a second glance. She had been watching 40 hours of it for 9 days. His left shoulder dropped a fraction of a second before his weight committed to a forward drive. His right foot planted slightly wider than his left when he was about to change direction. When he moved fast, he moved very fast. But the half second before he moved fast contained every tell he had, stacked on top of each other, perfectly readable if you knew what you were looking at. She knew what she was looking at. She had known since day 4. She watched 2 more hours of footage that evening, making notes on her small card, cross-referencing against the exercise configurations she had designed for the demonstration. Then she closed the laptop, opened the legal pad and wrote, Day 12, ready. She went to sleep. Day 13, 10:59, the warehouse. Lena entered through the north door with 1 minute to spare and stood just inside the threshold for a moment. Let herself see the space clearly. 3 camera positions, one covering the full floor, one angled from the right side wall, one overhead, exactly as she had specified in the request. Lieutenant Call Strand in the upper left corner with his clipboard and his careful neutral expression. 43 operators arranged around the perimeter in the configuration she had designated. Vreeland was already at the center of the floor, arms loose at his sides, weight distributed evenly. The posture of a man who has been ready for this for longer than the last 48 hours. Who has been ready for something like this, some version of this confrontation, some moment of definitive resolution, since a female Navy commander walked into his briefing room 9 days ago and looked at him like his certainty was a document she was going to read and annotate and file. 6 feet of distance between them, 43 people who had stopped breathing. Lena walked to the center of the floor, turned to the room. This is a joint CQB demonstration under full observer protocol. The purpose is to document and evaluate integrated counter-aggression technique as it applies to the combined SEAL Marine curriculum. Both participants have consented in writing. Standard safety boundaries apply. She looked toward the corner. Colonel Strand. Confirmed. Strand's voice was level. Cameras are active. Observer protocol is in effect. Lena turned back to Vreeland. Ready when you are, Sergeant. He looked at her. And in that look, there was a final calculation, the last pass of an assessment he had been running since day one. He was looking for the tell, the hesitation, the thing that would confirm what he had spent 9 days being certain of. That, under real pressure, without the protection of paperwork and protocol, and the careful management of her own image, she would reveal herself to be something smaller than her file. She gave him nothing, not composure as performance, not stillness as strategy, just nothing that he could use, nothing that belonged to the framework he had built for her. He moved fast, committed. The way he moved when he was serious, which was the way she had watched him move in 40 hours of footage. He came for her right shoulder, angling to drive her back and down with his full weight behind it, using 230 pounds the way he had always used it, as a physical fact that other people had to account for. And Lena was not there. 2 lateral steps. Before he completed the drive, timed not to the moment he moved, but to the moment before it, to the left shoulder drop, to the right foot plant, to the half-second window that contained every tell stacked on top of each other. She had studied those tells for 9 days, had watched them in 40 hours of footage until she could read them the way you read the first word of a sentence you already know. She redirected his momentum, not against it, with it. Used the full weight of his commitment against the direction he was committed to. Turned his certainty into the mechanism of his own takedown. He went past her, and her hands were on his right arm, before he had registered that his target was not where he had aimed, and then the floor was coming up at a speed that 31 years of combatives experience had not fully prepared him for, because experience prepares you for opponents who fight you, not for opponents who have already read the book you're reading from. The takedown was clean, controlled, no excess force, no performance. 3-second pin. She released him, stepped back, stood straight, said nothing. The warehouse had gone somewhere beyond silence. 43 people had stopped being 43 people and had become one held breath. No one moved, no one made a sound. The ventilation system in the ceiling was audible. Vreeland lay on the floor for 2 seconds, and in those 2 seconds something happened to his face that Pruitt, watching from the third row, the man who had read this face for 11 years, had no prior category for. Not anger, not humiliation, not the particular expression of a man who has lost a fair fight. Something underneath all of those, something that lived at the level of structure rather than surface. The specific expression of a person whose foundational certainty has just been demonstrated, not argued with, not contradicted, but demonstrated to have been wrong. He got up, methodical, knees first, then feet, then standing. He looked at Lena. She looked back at him. Same expression she had worn since day one. Steady, clear, without triumph or performance or any of the things he had been waiting to find in her face and had never found. Again, he said. The word came out of him like something he hadn't planned to say. Not defiance, not denial. The raw need of a man who has just had the ground shift under his entire understanding of himself and needs it desperately to have been a mistake. Lena shook her head. We have what we need. This demonstration is complete. She turned to Strand. Colonel, documented. Strand said without looking up from his clipboard. Thank you, Commander. And that was it. No speech. No moment of public triumph. No pause to let the room process it. Just a woman turning back toward the work. The same as she had been doing for 13 days. The same as she intended to keep doing. Calloway exhaled slowly, looked at the ceiling. Fontaine stood very still. Dara Winslow, in the back left corner, did not cry. She was not a person who cried easily, but her jaw was tight and her eyes were bright, and she looked at Lena's back and thought, there it is. That's what it looks like when someone has been ready the whole time. Pruitt looked at Vreeland. Vreeland was looking at his hands. Not dramatically, not for the room. Just looking at them the way you look at something you thought you understood completely and are suddenly not sure about it all. 11 years, Pruitt had stood next to this man. He had never seen him look like this, like he was doing inventory, like something had been broken open, and he was trying to figure out what had been inside it. 1115 hours, Lena's office. Door closed, lights low, hands flat on the desk. She let the adrenaline work through her system because that was what bodies did after something like this, and there was no shortcutting physiology. She sat with it, let it move, did not try to name it or manage it or turn it into something useful before it had finished being what it was. She had done what she came to do. That should have felt clean, and it did, mostly. but underneath the clean feeling was something more textured than relief. The specific emotional geography of someone who has held themselves at a very particular tension for a very long time and has just released it. And what lives underneath that tension, when you let it go, is not just relief. There is exhaustion in it, and something that might honestly be described as grief, not for herself, but for the situation, for the fact that 13 days of this had been necessary, for the weight of what it had cost everyone in that room to arrive at a moment of truth that should have been established before she ever walked through the front gate. She was still sitting there when the knock came. She already knew. "Come in," she said. Colt Vreeland opened the door. He was not the same man who had walked into that warehouse 40 minutes ago. The physical dimensions were identical, still 230 pounds, still the face that had looked at her with 31 years of certainty on day one. But the certainty was gone. What had replaced it was something she recognized from other rooms and other moments of truth. Not defeat. Something more honest than defeat. Reckoning. He stood just inside the door, did not sit. She did not invite him to. "I'm not here to make excuses," he said. "I know," a silence. Long enough to be deliberate. "I've been in this branch for 31 years," he said. "I've been wrong before. I don't always handle it well." He stopped. The stop of a man who is navigating toward something and checking his footing at each step. Day 9. "That wasn't a slip, I know that too." He nodded once, looked at the floor briefly, looked back at her. "I thought if I could get you to react, if I could make you defensive, or angry, or small in front of the room, it would prove what I already believed." He said it without dressing it up. "And you didn't react, so I escalated. And I kept escalating." A pause that had weight to it. "Because I couldn't figure out how to be wrong." Lena looked at him for a long moment. "That," she said, "is the most honest thing you've said since day one." "I know." He stood there. "What happens now?" She leaned back. "Formal review will proceed. The documentation is with Strand, and the committee process will run its course." "That's not in my control." She held his gaze. "What I can control is my recommendation." Vreeland waited. The specific waiting of someone who has stopped expecting a particular outcome and is genuinely uncertain what comes next. Which was, Lena recognized, something entirely new for him. "I'm not recommending court-martial," she said. He blinked. "I'm not recommending separation." She held his gaze. "What I'm recommending is restructured duty. You remain in this program under my command as assistant instructor. You train alongside the people you've been dismissing. You are evaluated on performance by the same standard applied to everyone else. At 60 days, the committee reviews your record and determines next steps." Vreeland was very still. Why? The question was genuine. She could hear it, the real question underneath the word. Not why the lenient recommendation. Why any of it? Why not the efficient, defensible, career-ending response that the documentation fully supported? "Because destroying you doesn't fix anything," she said. "It makes me look decisive. It makes you a cautionary tale, and it changes nothing about the system that produced this situation." She set her pen down. "But if you actually correct, if you do the work, if you sit in this program and let yourself see what is actually here, then something real changes, not just for you. For every operator who has been watching you for 2 weeks to see how someone with your experience handles being wrong." It was quiet for a long moment, processing the whole geometry of it. "You have a choice," she said. "Fight the review and lose everything, or accept the recommendation and earn something back." She looked at him steadily. "I'd suggest the second, but it's yours." He turned toward the door. "Vreeland," he stopped. "This doesn't end today," she said. "This is the beginning of the hard part. The part where you actually show up differently, every day. In front of people who remember what you were." She paused. "That's harder than anything that happened in that warehouse." He was quiet for a long moment. "I know," he said, and he left. Lena sat alone. For 1 full minute she allowed herself to simply sit without a task, without a next step, the closest thing to rest that the last 13 days had produced. Then she opened the yellow legal pad, turned to a fresh page, wrote 2 lines, day 13. He said it, the honest thing. No audience. Finally, capped the pen, picked up her phone, called Admiral Merritt's office. Because the formal review needed her recommendation on record, before the process moved faster than her intentions. And the process always moved fast once it started. And she had never, not once in 12 years, let the process move faster than her intentions. She had work to do. Outside, across Camp Harlow. 43 operators were moving through the rest of the afternoon with something altered in the way they carried themselves. Not softer. Nothing about this program was soft, but something had shifted in the quality of the work, the way it felt to be part of it. Like the first afternoon of something that had just become real, like a standard that had just been shown, not explained, not argued for, but shown on a warehouse floor in 11 seconds of physics and 40 hours of preparation to be something that actually meant what it said it meant, like the beginning of what this program had been designed to build all along. Day 14 began the way Vreeland had said he understood it would begin, which turned out to be different from actually beginning it formation. The base still dark, the air carrying that specific October chill that gets into the back of your neck and stays there. 43 operators arranged in the configuration Lina had established on day 1, not by branch, not by seniority, by team, mixed, integrated. The configuration that had felt foreign on day 1 and now, 2 weeks in, had become the grammar of how this group understood itself. Vreeland stood at the back. For the first time in 31 years, Colt Vreeland stood at the back of a formation. The operators around him didn't know how to hold that. Some of them had been taking their cues from him since day 1, reading his posture, his expressions, his micro-responses to Lena's decisions as a secondary signal for how to feel about those decisions. And now the secondary signal was standing at the back of the room in the position of assistant instructor, which meant receiving direction instead of giving it, which meant that the entire interpretive framework some of them had been operating inside had just lost its anchor point. They watched him, sideways, the way military people watch, with peripheral vision, with the quality of attention that looks like nothing and catches everything. What they expected was the performance of compliance, the version of doing what you're told that is actually resistance wearing a different uniform, the crossed arms just below the threshold of obvious, the fractional delay in response that signals I am technically present and functionally elsewhere. They had seen that performance before, from people who had been corrected and had not accepted the correction, and were waiting for the opportunity to demonstrate that they hadn't. What they got was something harder to categorize. Vreeland showed up, did exactly what was asked, received instruction without annotation, called corrections with the same technical precision he had always brought to the work, just quieter, occupied the space he had been assigned, and did not expand beyond it. There was no theater in any of it, no performance of humility, no visible evidence of a man doing something he found degrading and wanting credit for the degradation. Just function, just presence, just the work. Hector Pruitt watched it from across the formation on day 15 and said to Calloway during a water break quietly, in the tone of someone making an observation they haven't fully processed yet, "He's not performing," he decided. "That's different." Calloway looked across the field at Vreeland, who was running a smaller cluster of operators through a combative sequence with the same flat precision he'd brought to every technical task in 31 years. Just positioned differently. He looks like himself, Calloway said. Yeah, Pruitt said. Just quieter, which was, in Pruitt's experience, the most significant version of someone. The version that shows up after the noise has been cleared away. When what remains is what was actually there the whole time. What Vreeland was actually experiencing during those first days was something he didn't have a name for, because it was outside the vocabulary his life had built for him. He was experiencing the specific discomfort of being in a room where your previous certainty has been proven wrong, and having to keep showing up in that room, not because you're forced to, because you chose to. Because somewhere in a short conversation in a small office on day 13, something had shifted in the architecture of his understanding in a way that couldn't be unshifted. Physical discomfort he knew how to manage. He had built his career on managing it. You name it, you face it, you push through it, you come out the other side with the knowledge that you survived it. That was the protocol. That was the whole system. This kind of discomfort didn't yield to the protocol. It only yielded to time. And to the harder thing, which was honesty. Sustained, daily, unrewarded honesty about what you had gotten wrong and why, and what it would take to correct it. Vreeland had 31 years of experience with time. He had almost none with that other thing, and the learning curve in week 3 was steep and private and visible to no one but himself. Day 16 brought the first evidence that something was actually shifting beneath the surface rather than just on it. Joint Land Navigation Review. Vreeland positioned at the eastern station with a smaller cluster of operators. A young Marine named Castillo, precise, internal, the kind of operator who processed everything carefully before outputting anything, made a navigational decision under time pressure that deviated from the standard approach. He had to account for a slope variable on the northeast ridge that the textbook route didn't consider. The deviation was unusual. It was also, if you ran it forward in your head with the actual terrain variables, more efficient than the standard route by a meaningful margin. Vreeland's instinct fired immediately. 31 years of instinct. The reflex that reads deviation as error because deviation is usually error, and the fastest way to run a training program is to correct deviation before it becomes habit. He opened his mouth, then stopped, actually looked at the route Castillo had chosen, ran it forward, accounted for the slope, ran it again, checked his own reflex against the actual evidence in front of him rather than against the category the evidence had been automatically filed into. The deviation was more efficient. That works, Vreeland said, flat, no editorial, no performance of openness, just the fact. Log it as an alternate solution. Castillo looked at him, the specific look of someone who wasn't sure they'd heard correctly. Log it, Vreeland said, and moved on. Castillo logged it. But he stood there for a moment after, looking at the space where Vreeland had been, and then looked at Dara Winslow 2 positions to his left, who had heard every word. She gave him a look that said, yes, that happened, and yes, it matters, and don't make a thing of it right now, because the thing of it is already there, whether we make it one or not. Lena wasn't present for that exchange. Pruitt told her about it that evening, with the careful neutrality of a man who understood that what he was reporting was significant and didn't want his own reaction to contaminate the significance. She listened without expression. When he finished, she opened the yellow legal pad, wrote one line, day 16. He called it right, unprompted, said nothing else about it, closed the pad. But she thought about it at 0300 the next morning when she couldn't sleep. The way you think about small things that have the shape of large ones. Day 21, 0600. The memo was on her desk when she arrived. She read it standing, her coffee going cold beside her, with the specific focus of someone who needs to understand the full shape of something before they allow themselves to react to any part of it. Joint Force Integration Office, Pentagon letterhead, a bureaucratic document with the particular weight of something decided several levels above the people it would most directly affect. The program was under review for restructuring. A senior committee had been convened 3 weeks ago to examine whether the integrated training model was cost-effective. Their preliminary recommendation was to revert to separate branch training tracks with quarterly joint exercises rather than a full integrated curriculum. She read the date the committee had convened, 3 weeks ago, before the demonstration, before Strand's documentation, before Castillo's alternate navigation solution that Vreeland had logged without being asked, before Fontaine had raised his hand for the record and said the timing discrepancy was his call, not Dara's, before Calloway and Fontaine had spent 18 days finding a shared language that wasn't in either branch's protocol, before any of it. The committee had made a preliminary recommendation to dismantle a process without ever seeing what that process produced. She put the memo down, picked it up again, read the date one more time. Then she picked up her phone and called Admiral Merritt directly. No adjutant, no scheduling request. The direct line Merritt had given her personally the day she assigned her the program, with the specific instruction, use this when something can't wait for channels. Merritt answered on the second ring. Hargrove, Admiral. I've read the restructuring memo. I assumed you had. The committee's evidence base is 3 weeks old, Lena said. The program's current performance data post-dates their entire deliberation. I know then you know their preliminary recommendation is based on an incomplete picture. A pause. The specific pause of someone who is not disagreeing but is deciding how much to say. What are you asking me, Commander? 30 days, Lena said. 30 days to complete the program under current structure and submit a full performance data set. Let the committee evaluate actual results before they recommend dismantling the process that produced them. A beat. That's not second-guessing their judgment. It's giving them information they didn't have when they formed it. Silence on the line. 7 seconds. She counted. Send me the package by end of day, Merritt said. I'll take it to the committee chair personally. Thank you, Admiral. Don't thank me yet. The committee doesn't like being redirected. With respect, sir, I'm not redirecting them. I'm completing their evidence base. That's a different thing. A shorter pause this time. End of day, Hargrove. The line went dead. Lena stood at her desk for 30 seconds without moving, then sat down, opened her laptop, and began assembling the most comprehensive performance data package the program had ever produced. Every drill time across 21 days, every accuracy score, every communication drill result, every documented instance of cross-branch technique integration with before and after comparisons. Callaway and Fontaine's communication evolution charted across 18 days, the early friction, the middle adjustment, the last 4 transmissions of the day 30 drill that had been clean and fast and built from a protocol they had invented themselves because the standard one didn't fit what they had actually learned about each other. Castillo's alternate navigation solution with full technical annotation. Dara Winslow's performance trajectory from day 1, when she had been running hard and speaking little and trying to be invisible, to day 21, when she navigated her team through 3 consecutive checkpoints faster than any other team in the exercise. And at the back of the package, 3 pages she had been writing carefully over the previous week. A qualitative assessment. What the data represented in human terms. What it meant when 2 operators from different branches found a shared language under pressure. Not because they were told to, but because the work required it and they did the work. What it meant when a 31-year veteran revised a judgment based on evidence and did it unprompted and logged it and moved on without making it about himself. What it meant that a 22-year-old woman had stood in a program designed to doubt her and had performed at a level that made the doubt irrelevant, not by fighting the doubt, but by simply, persistently, precisely continuing to be what she was. She submitted the package at 17:47, 13 minutes before end of day. Then she went back to the training floor. Because the program was still running, and her people still needed their commander present. Same as every other day, same as it had always been. Day 29 arrived with the committee's response. Lena read it at 0800 standing. This time her expression did something different at the end. Not relief. Relief implied she had been uncertain, and she had not been uncertain about the data. Something quieter than relief. The specific stillness of someone who has been carrying something alone for a long time and has just been told they can set it down. The committee had agreed to extend the program's integrated structure through full graduation. The restructuring proposal was tabled indefinitely. They would submit a new recommendation based on complete performance data after graduation. She had asked for 30 days. They had given her the rest of the program. She wrote 4 words in the legal pad. Day 29, let it finish. Capped the pen, called the morning formation. Because graduation was 18 days away and there was still work to do day 30. The joint urban movement drill. Callaway and Fontaine moved through the first 3 stations with the specific efficiency of people who have built something together and no longer have to think about the building. Their communication minimal, precise, timed in a way that looked effortless, because it had been effortful for long enough that the effort had become invisible. At Station 4, the simulation introduced a variable that wasn't in the briefing. A simulated civilian in the movement path. Immediate recalibration required without breaking the communication rhythm they had established. Callaway saw it, gave Fontaine the halt signal. Fontaine acknowledged. Callaway gave the reroute signal, a secondary signal they had developed themselves over 10 days of drilling that existed in neither branch's standard protocol. Theirs, built from the specific geography of where their 2 communication cultures met and where they diverged and what was needed in the space between. Fontaine acknowledged. They rerouted, completed the station, moved to 5, 11 seconds total. Lena watched it from the command position, wrote nothing. Some things don't need to be recorded because they are already the point. Vreeland was standing 3 feet to her left. He watched the same sequence, was quiet for a long moment after they cleared Station 5, then said without looking at her in the flat, factual voice he used when he was stating something rather than performing something. They built their own protocol. Yes, not in the curriculum. No, he was quiet again. Better than the curriculum. Yes, she said. It is. Another silence. I would have flagged that as a deviation on day 1, he said. Shut it down before it had a chance to prove itself, I know. He looked at her. That would have been wrong. Yes, she said. It would have. He nodded once. Looked back at the drill floor. Said nothing else. 45 words. Less than a minute. No audience, no cameras. No one watching except the two of them and the empty space of a conversation that didn't need to be anything more than what it was. But it was the most significant exchange Lena had had since day 13, because it wasn't performance. Vreeland was not a man who performed accountability. When he said something like that in that tone, in that context, he meant it, and meaning it. For a man built the way he was built, who had spent 31 years being right about enough things that being wrong felt like structural failure. Cost something real and paid it anyway. Day 35, afternoon combative session. Vreeland running it as assistant instructor. He called Dara Winslow's name, asked her to take the floor, just like that. The way you ask someone to take the floor when you believe they should be on it. Not as a gesture, not as a demonstration of his own growth for anyone watching. Just you, center. Now, Dara looked at him for half a second, the pause that contains a whole conversation, then walked to the center of the floor. She demonstrated the counter-aggression sequence with a precision and economy of motion that stilled the room the way competence always stills a room. Not with drama, but with the undeniable weight of something done exactly right. Clean lines, no wasted movement. The sequence executing itself through her body, the way things execute when they have been practiced past the point of thought and become instinct. When she finished, Vreeland said, "That's the standard. Everyone should be executing that in their sleep by day 40. He moved on. Back to the group. Back to the instruction. Didn't make a speech about it. Didn't mark the moment with anything that would make it about him, rather than about what she had just demonstrated. Just named the standard, attributed it to her performance, and continued. Calloway, standing to Dara's left, said under his breath, "He just did on day 35 what he should have done on day 1. Dara kept her eyes forward. Better late than never. She said it without bitterness, without irony, as a fact simply stated, which was the most telling version of it. That evening, Lena found her at the equipment bay. Same place they had talked on day 6. Dara looked up when Lena walked in, and her expression was different from every time before. Not guarded, not performing steadiness, just open. The expression of someone who has set down something heavy and is still adjusting to the absence of its weight. Real answer, Lena said. How are you doing? Dara thought about it. Tired in a good way. The kind of tired that means something actually happened. A pause. He asked me to demonstrate today, I know. Did you suggest it to him? No. Dara absorbed that. Looked at her hands for a moment. I keep waiting for the other shoe. Like this got real too fast, and something's going to reset it back to how it was. Lena was quiet for a moment. Then, that's not an irrational feeling. Systems don't change overnight. What happened here is real, but it's also fragile. It'll need people who keep showing up to protect it. She looked at Dara directly. People who were here from day 1. Who know what it costs to build this and what it would cost to lose it. Dara looked at her. Why me specifically? Because you ran harder and spoke less and carried more than you should have had to, Lena said. And you did it without quitting. And people watch that, even the ones who didn't show it. The program needs what you know, not just your scores. What you know about doing this work when the room isn't on your side. She pushed off the equipment rack. Go sleep. Long day tomorrow. Yes, ma'am. Lena left. Dara stood in the equipment bay for a long time after, looking at nothing in particular, then went back to her kit. Because there was still work to do, which, she was learning, was always the answer. Not as resignation, as the thing that was actually true about the work she had chosen and the life she was building inside it. Day 36, 1800 hours. Vreeland knocked on her office door. He came in and sat down, this time without being invited to, which meant something had changed in the architecture between them. Not friendship, not comfort. The specific territory of two people who have been through something real together and have stopped pretending they haven't. He put a single sheet of paper on her desk, formally formatted, request for evaluation letter, 60-day committee review. She put the paper aside without reading it. Because the paper wasn't the reason he was here, and they both knew it. What do you actually want to say, Vreeland? He was quiet for a moment, the quiet of a man who has been preparing something and has arrived at the moment of saying it, and is finding that the preparation and the saying are two different things. 31 years, he said. I spent 31 years believing I had a clear picture of what made someone qualified to lead in this environment. Believed the picture was objective, based on real criteria, performance, experience, demonstrated capability under pressure. He looked at his hands, the same gesture she had noticed in the warehouse, the gesture of a man doing inventory. What I didn't account for was how much of what I called objective was actually preference, shaped by 31 years of standing in rooms that all looked the same. He looked up at her. I dismissed you before you opened your mouth. Made a decision based on a picture in my head that had nothing to do with your record, your capability, or anything observable about you. He said it plainly, without dressing it up, without the kind of language people use when they're performing accountability rather than doing it. And then I spent 2 weeks trying to make reality fit the decision I'd already made instead of letting reality change the decision. He stopped, I want to say that clearly. Not for the review. Not for the record, he held her gaze. To you, in this room. Without anyone else here, the office was very quiet. Lena looked at him for a long moment. Then, I heard you, he nodded. The nod of a man who had said the thing and did not expect more than that from it, which was the correct expectation. The letter will be accurate, she said. Your performance since day 14 has been professional, technically precise, and on several occasions genuinely instructive for the group. That's what the record shows, and that's what I'll write. She picked up the request form. You'll have it before the review date. He stood. She let him get to the door. Vreeland, he turned. What you said in here, she said, is harder to do than anything that happened in that warehouse. Both took courage. I want you to know I understand the difference. Something moved through his face. Not emotion exactly, or not only emotion. Something more like the expression of a person who has just been seen accurately and completely and doesn't quite know what to do with it. The specific disorientation of being understood by someone you spent 2 weeks trying to dismiss. Thank you, Commander, he said. He left. Lena sat for a minute, then opened the legal pad to the last blank page, wrote one line. Day 36, he said it. No audience, no benefit to him. He just said it. Capped the pen, closed the pad. 2 days later, day 38, the second memo arrived. Different letterhead, different body, higher in the chain than the restructuring committee. The Joint Force Integration Office had been monitoring the program's performance data since Merit submitted the package, quietly, without announcing themselves. For 36 days they had been watching. The memo recommended that the Camp Harlow integrated curriculum be formally adopted as the foundational model for a new national joint training standard. If approved by the Secretary of Defense, which the language of the memo indicated was a matter of process rather than outcome, every elite training program in the country would be restructured around the framework Lena had been running for 38 days. Not a pilot project, not a regional model, a national standard. She read it standing at her desk. Coffee going cold, read it twice, sat down, stared at the wall for 90 seconds. She was thinking about something Admiral Merritt had said to her during their first meeting, before the program started, before any of this. Merritt had said, the goal is never one program. The goal is what one program proves is possible. She called Merritt. I read it, she said when Merritt answered. I assumed. This is going to bring attention, Lena said. Press attention. Political attention. People who need this to be a symbol are going to find it very convenient. Yes, I need the operators protected from that. Not from recognition. They've earned recognition. From being turned into symbols before they've had time to finish becoming operators. Her voice was steady. Not emotional. Just clear about what she was asking. Let them graduate as the thing they are. Then make whatever announcement needs to be made. A pause. That's 9 days, Hargrove. Yes, sir. A longer pause. Agreed. 9 days. She thanked Merritt, hung up, and did not tell anyone. Not Strand, not Pruitt, not Calloway or Fontaine or Dara. Not Vreeland. She carried the memo alone for 9 days. Which was, she thought, sitting at her desk in the quiet of the operations building at EO 600 on a morning when the rest of the base was still waking up. One of the harder things she had done in the whole program. Harder than the obstacle course. Harder than standing up from the mud. Harder than writing the training request that would lead to the warehouse. Because those things had been about her. Her preparation, her patience, her strategy. This was about them. And the hardest version of caring about people is the one where you protect them from something good, because the timing of the good thing would change them before they were finished becoming who they were supposed to be. She carried it. 9 days, said nothing. Days 42 through 44. The final evaluation sequence, 3 days. Every core competency of the integrated curriculum. Physical performance, tactical execution, communication under pressure, decision-making in dynamic conditions, joint operational planning. Each operator evaluated individually and as part of mixed teams. One standard applied identically to all 43 people. No branch curve, no adjustment, no exception. The evaluators worked without commentary, without expression. The professional neutrality of people who respect the process they are executing and the people they are executing it on. Day 42. Zo 6 EZO, obstacle course. Dara Winslow went third. She ran it the way she had been running everything for 42 days. Not for anyone watching, not for the number at the end, but with the complete focused attention of someone who has learned that the work itself is the only argument that actually matters. Every station clean, every transition executed with the efficiency of someone who has stopped thinking about efficiency and just moved. She crossed the finish line and Calloway was at the checkpoint. He looked at his stopwatch, then at her. Said it quietly, just for her. Top 5 Winslow. All branches, all cohorts in this program's history. Dara stopped. Her breathing was hard. Confirmed top 5. She stood there for a moment, not moving. The specific stillness of someone whose body is still in motion and whose mind has just gone very, very quiet. Not because she hadn't believed she was capable of it. She had always known what she was capable of. But knowing and having it confirmed in a number on a stopwatch by a man who has no reason to say it except that it's true. Those are different things. She nodded once. Moved to the next station. Calloway watched her go and thought about day 6. About a young woman who had been trying to disappear, who had been running herself ragged to prove the same things everyone around her was simply assumed to have and was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical demand, who had sat in a debrief with her hands flat on her knees and said nothing because there was nothing she could say that wouldn't be used against her. Some people, he thought, are too good to disappear. The question is always whether the room around them gets big enough to see it. This room had day 45. Final evaluation results posted. Main operations board. No ceremony, no announcement. Just a list with names and scores, the way results have always been posted in programs that respect the people they evaluate. Dara Winslow's name was 5th from the top. She stood in front of that board at 0715 and did not move for a long time. Not performing stillness, just standing with it, with the number, with what it meant and what it had cost and what it proved, and what, honestly, she had known the whole time even when no one else did. Calloway found her there and stood beside her without speaking for a full minute. Then, 5th overall, 43 people. 2 branches. I see it, she said quietly. How does it feel? She thought about it for longer than the question seemed to require, because it deserved a real answer. Like I always knew it was there, she said finally. The number. I always knew what I was capable of. I just needed the room to stop arguing with itself long enough for me to do the work. Calloway nodded slowly. Yeah, he said. That's exactly what happened, day 46, graduation -1. Lena spent the day on the training floor, not because anything remained to train, because she didn't know how to not be there. It was where the work had happened, where the truth had been demonstrated, where everything that was supposed to be impossible had turned entirely possible, given one standard, applied consistently, with enough patience to let the proof accumulate. Pruitt found her at 1600, working through a technique she had been meaning to refine since week 1. You know the program's over, he said. Tomorrow, she said. Today it's still running. He walked in, stood nearby, in the easy way of someone who has learned that some people need to be stood next to rather than spoken to. What happens after graduation? Back to my unit. Then curriculum development for the new standard. She paused, realized she'd said too much, looked at him. There's an announcement coming after tomorrow. You'll hear about it then. Pruitt looked at her. He was smart enough to understand the shape of what she wasn't saying. That big? He said quietly. Yeah, she said. That big. He was quiet for a moment. Then, Vreeland's going to be all right. I want you to know that. Whatever the committee decides, whatever comes next, he's changed. Not the way people change when they're forced to. The way they change when they decide to. That's permanent, I know, she said. That's why I wrote the letter I wrote. He looked at her. What did you say? The truth, she said. Same as always, day 47. Graduation. Aero 800. 43 operators in dress uniform in the main operations building. Not arranged by branch, not by rank, by team, mixed, integrated. The configuration the program had built them into over 47 days. the configuration that had felt imposed on day one, and now was simply how this group understood itself. Lena stood at the front and looked at them for a long moment before she spoke. She looked at Fontaine, standing with his weight evenly distributed, and his eyes forward in the posture of someone who has found his footing and stopped thinking about it. She looked at Calloway, who caught her eye and gave her the smallest possible nod that communicated everything it needed to, without requiring any of it to be said. She looked at Castillo and Torres, and the others who had arrived here as separate parts of separate institutions and were leaving as something more integrated than either. She looked at Dara Winslow, fifth in the front row, back straight, chin level. Not performing confidence, the real thing. The thing that shows up when you've stopped needing the performance because the work has made it unnecessary. She looked at Vreeland, standing at the back in his assistant instructor position, already looking at her when she found him. His expression stripped of the certainty that had been its defining feature since day one. Not empty, something had filled the space the certainty had left. Something quieter. Something that Pruitt, standing beside him, would spend the next several days trying to find the right word for and would eventually settle on. Earned. Lena took a breath. 47 days, she said. 43 of you. One standard. She let that sit for a moment. I'm not going to tell you what you accomplished because you already know it. I'm not going to tell you what it means because you've been living what it means for 6 weeks. She looked across the room, every face. One at a time. What I will tell you is this. What was built in this room does not belong to me. It does not belong to any branch, any rank, or any decision made above this level. It belongs to the 43 people standing in it. You built it, you held it, you earned it every single day without exception, and without anyone handing it to you. The room was absolutely still. This program will have consequences beyond this base. She had thought carefully about how much to say. Enough to honor what they had done, not enough to turn them into symbols before they'd had time to simply be graduates. What you demonstrated here has been seen by people with the ability to make it mean something larger. But that's tomorrow. Right now in this room, you are 43 operators who showed up and did the work. That is the thing that made everything else possible. A pause. Don't forget the order of operations. She looked at them one last time. Dismissed as candidates. Recognized as graduates. Carry the standard. The room came to attention. One motion. 43 people, 2 branches. One motion. Not because anyone ordered it. Because some responses are too large to be contained inside normal behavior. And attention is what the body does when it needs to honor something it doesn't have adequate words for. Lena held the salute for 3 seconds. Then released it, afterward, in the courtyard, in the particular organized noise of a military graduation. Handshakes, photographs. The specific loud relief of people who have been under pressure for a long time and have finally been given permission to exhale. Lena stood slightly apart, not isolated, just present, taking a moment to be inside it before it was over. A journalist she didn't recognize appeared at her shoulder with a recorder. Someone new, someone who had gotten press credentials without her knowing. Commander Hargrove, you've been offered a promotion and a media feature. You've declined both. Why? Lena looked out at the courtyard. At Fontaine and Calloway, standing together, talking with the easy shorthand of people who built a language together and no longer have to think about speaking it. At Castillo, explaining something technical to 3 other operators who were listening with the specific attention of people who want to understand, not just hear. At Dara Winslow, who had found her father on a video call in a quiet corner of the courtyard and was holding the phone with both hands, saying something that made the man on the screen put his hand over his face in the way that people do when something has moved them past the threshold of what expressions can hold. At Vreeland and Pruitt, standing together, not talking, not performing, just present, side by side in the specific quality of 2 people who have been through something real together and don't need to narrate it to each other because they were both there. She looked back at the journalist. I don't need to be a symbol, she said. I need to be effective. She put her hand briefly on the journalist's shoulder, not unkind, just conclusive, and walked back into the courtyard toward Calloway, who had materialized quietly at the edge of the gathering, holding a mug in her direction without making a thing of it. She took it, still warm. She drank it and stood in that courtyard with her people. For the first time in 47 days, she was not thinking about the next thing, not running scenarios. not building a case or planning a sequence or holding something at careful tension, while the pressure tried to find a way around it, just standing in this specific courtyard on this specific morning, with these 43 specific people who had built something real and were now inside the brief window before real things get complicated by what comes next. That night, her office. One last time, the yellow legal pad on the desk, 47 pages. She opened it to page 1 and read it straight through, every word, every single line entry that had stood in for a full day she hadn't had language for yet. Every piece of evidence she had set down one brick at a time without knowing exactly what she was building until it was built. 22 minutes, cover to cover. When she finished, she sat with the closed pad in her hands, felt the weight of it, specific, not heavy. The weight of 47 days of choosing precision over reaction, strategy over anger, the long proof over the fast argument. The weight of every morning she had arrived before the base woke up, and every night she had sat in this small office with a desk that faced a wall and written one more line into a record that no amount of bias or sabotage or deliberate humiliation had been able to interrupt. She put the pad in her bag, not as a trophy, as a record of something that had actually happened, something real and complete, something that had required every version of herself she had, the prepared one and the exhausted one, and the one who stood in the dark before dawn and said, "You don't get to decide what I am to no one," and meant it more than anything she had ever said in a briefing room. She turned off the light, walked out. The base was quiet in the specific way that places go quiet after something significant has settled into them. Not empty, settled. The way a room feels after a long conversation that finally said the thing it needed to say. Colt Vreeland had shoved her face first into the mud on day 9. She had stood up in 2 seconds, and then she had done the harder thing, the less visible thing, the thing that doesn't get documented in footage, or turned into a headline, or announced in a Pentagon memo. She had stayed, had held the standard for all of them, including him, including the system that had produced him, including every person who had stood in this program and watched and waited, and slowly, incrementally, decided to believe what they were seeing instead of what they'd been told to expect. She walked to her car, drove out through the front gates of Camp Harlow as the first gray light of morning began to come up over the Virginia tree line. Behind her, in 47 pages of entries, in a program that was about to become the blueprint for something larger than one base and one commander and one standard held through 47 days of resistance, was the proof of something that had always been true and had simply required the right conditions to be demonstrated. That the work is the argument, that the standard is the proof, that the person who shows up first and stays latest and does the most careful preparation and holds the most precise record and never once needs the room's permission to know her own worth, that person does not need to win a fight. She just needs to outlast the certainty of the people who decided she couldn't. She always does.